So let's go back, and if you can remember where you were when you heard about Sputnik and what your impressions were.
Well, I'd graduated from the Naval Academy in June of that year and had gone in the Air Force, and I was in flight school at Spence Air Base in Moultrie, Georgia. And I just celebrated my birthday on the 3rd, and I was in training, and I think I had just soloed T-34, so I was just beginning my flight career when we got the word on the 4th that Sputnik had launched, and got everybody's attention. You know, the Russians are beating us like a drum, and so what do we do? And we didn't have, I think Vanguard was blowing up or whatever it was back in those days, and so it got our attention. So that's where I was at flight school, and working towards getting my wings. I just started flight training.
And your emphasis was on being a test pilot, and I know that for a lot of people in that position at that time, the idea of being an astronaut was rather remote. So when did that occur to you? When did you decide to pursue that, or why?
Well, a test pilot wasn't even in my thoughts at that time. I just wanted to get my wings and become a fighter pilot or in the Air Force. And so I was working hard, and we finally got my wings in let's say it would be September '58, about a year later. And I was at Webb Air Force Base in Big Spring, Texas at the time. And my assignment was to Fighter Interceptor School at Moultrie, Georgia, Moody Air Force Base. So I went back to Georgia and finished that training up, and was assigned to, this would be in the spring of 1959, and was assigned to a Fighter Interceptor Squadron in Ramstein, Germany. And about that time, as I recall, the first astronauts and cosmonauts were announced. And my first thought was, man, that'd be a great job, but I'm too young. I don't have any experience. I'm not a test pilot, not even close. So it just sort of went over my head. But then I was in Germany from May of '59 to June of '62, May of '62, about 3 years. And in April of '61, of course, Yuri Gagarin went up, and I was sitting alert in F-102s at the time, and that got our attention, of course. And several weeks later, Alan Shepard went up on his suborbital flight, and then Kennedy, a couple of weeks later, announced the Apollo program, and we hooed and hawed, you know, sure, 15 minutes in space, and we're going to go to the moon. It's 10 years, or less, I guess. And anyway, I was looking for an assignment. Air Force wanted me to go back to graduate school. They wanted more officers to have master's degrees. So I debated. Well, I could extend for a year in Germany and enjoy another year of flying, and then go to graduate school, or I could go to graduate school. And something just said go to graduate school. And if I hadn't made that decision, I never would have become an astronaut. So a year in Germany would have been fun, but it would have totally sidetracked the career that I eventually had. So I get to MIT, and by then the Apollo program was, this is '62, was well underway, and I need a year later, I needed a thesis, a project, and my thesis advisor said, "Well, you're a pilot." He said, "The instrumentation lab here in the Aero Department is looking for a couple of pilots to do some work on the Apollo guidance and navigation system, which we had the contract to build. So that sounded like fun. So I volunteered, and a guy named Mike Jones and I went over there and started working on this thesis. And I got to meet some astronauts doing that. They were coming up looking at the system. And I never met any guys as excited and as about a job in my life as these two guys and that I was meeting. And so I said, how did I get that job? And this was like in the, I guess, early 1964. And no, yeah, 64. And they said, well, you go to test pilot school and you might have a chance. So I volunteered for test pilot school and got us selected, and went to Edwards. Dottie and I had gotten married June of 63. So we camped our way across the country and ended up at Edwards Air Force Base. And a year later, I graduated from test pilot school. And that was like in August of 65. The very next month, there's an article in the paper that said NASA's having another astronaut selection. Please apply. And so I applied. I went to my boss, who was Chuck Yeager. He was in the Common and Test Pilot School. And I was now working for him and on staff. And I said, I'd like to volunteer. He said, well, we'll find out what you got to do. Well, anyway, we applied, and 4 of us in my test pilot school class got selected for that group of 19. Al Warden, Stu Russa, and Hank Hartsfield. So in April 66, I was an astronaut. Big Slate called and said, would you still like to come? I said, you bet. When I report, said, come here, I don't know, 4th of April, whatever it was. So the Air Force, of course, released us, and we still on active duty, but we moved to Houston. And that started at exciting 10 years for me at NASA. So it was just I look back now, and your life is a bunch of small decisions, and if a friend of mine said, keep your antennas up, and you get some vibes in your spirit that says this is the way you should go. And if you really think about it and convinced that's the way you should go, then things, and that's what happened with the space program. It was one step here, one step there, just down a path that led to the right decisions that led me to get selected.
That's amazing. And then, if I understand correctly, one of your first assignments was working on the Saturn V system. Is that right?
Yeah. Stu Russo and I were the 2 guys in the astronaut office who monitored the development and the progress of the Saturn V. So every month, Werner von Braun would have a staff meeting. And so we'd fly up to, in our T-38s to Huntsville and spend the night and have to go to the meeting and go home the next day. And then we'd report back to the astronaut office the status of the Saturn. And I think that went on for a year or so. And then also after in January of 67, of course, Apollo 1 fire occurred. And then after, we weren't on the investigating board, but as a result of that investigation, they formed the emergency egress working group. How do you get off the pad? How do you get out of the spacecraft? And so Stu Russo and I were assigned to that. So other than that, we were following, and I was also working on the lunar module engine, the propulsion systems, the descent engine and the ascent engine. And so those were sort of my additional duties. And that's what I did until, let's see, would be Apollo 10 flew in May of 69. And so about late 68, I got put on support crew for Apollo 10. And, uh, and that's where being on knowing the lunar module engines, I was sort of assigned to the lunar module side of that support crew. And I don't remember the other guys, but I helped write the activation and checkout procedures and brief the crew on systems and stuff as far as the propulsion systems and stuff. And then ended up in mission control for Apollo 10 as Capcom during the descent and landing. And the mission was, as you recall, was to take the lunar module to the moon for the very first time and check it all out and make sure the procedures for the checkout and initiation of descent and everything was right. And so that's what we did. We started down, but the lunar module didn't have it was overweight, didn't have enough fuel to land, was never intended to land. And so it's like they were down and aborted and came back up got into orbit. So it tested the whole system without actual landing the vehicle. And it was very successful. And so as a result of that, my involvement in Apollo 10, basically Neil Armstrong and Buzz, they said, why don't you come over and be Capcom for our flight for the landing? And so the whole team, Gene Kranz's flight director, just moved over. I wasn't supposed to do that job, but they asked me to do it because of the experience that I'd had on Apollo 10. So that's how I ended up Apollo 11 Capcom and helping with the development of the procedures and stuff activation and checkout.
So that puts an even clearer perspective, because of your intimate familiarity with the LIM, probably why, as much as anyone, you knew exactly what was happening when that delay occurred before you heard back the Eagle has landed. So what was going through your mind? What were you thinking must be happening during that silence?
Well, we knew they were on the ground. When Buzz Aldrin said, contact, engine stop, they landed. And so I guess a fleeting thought, hope they're right side up, but it looked like they were. And so when I heard engine stop, I said, copy you on the ground. And then there was dead silence for 2 or 3 seconds, I guess, but it seemed like an eternity. And I guess the tension was lifting in mission control, because it was really tense during the descent with the problems that we had. Communications to start, then a computer overloads, then a trajectory problem that led to a minimum fuel problem. And so all of those were compounding on one another. And so the tension in mission control got really, really high. And I'd never felt that in mission control, and never sensed the silence, I guess. People just focused on their systems. And so after, I guess, no more than a couple of seconds, Neil said, Houston Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed. And of course, we were so excited, I couldn't even pronounce tranquility. It came out twang. So then it was, it was a great relief when I heard contact, and that we'd made it onto the surface with, according to my watch, like 17 seconds before we were calling abort. We'd have probably called an abort. That would have been a critical call, but they were 20 or 30 feet off the moon during all this time, and descending slowly. Even if we'd have gotten to the end of the 60 seconds and I'd have called an abort, I'm convinced Neil Armstrong had the final authority. And if he was 15 feet off the moon, he still had 4% fuel remaining, and he would have landed. I'm convinced he would. There's no doubt. And so there were four of us who knew. Neil had gotten me aside with the crew and said, Charlie, when we land on the moon, I'm changing our call sign from Eagle to Tranquility Base. So there were four of us who knew that. So when he said Tranquility Base, even though I knew it was coming, it was Roger, Tranquility, we copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. So, and it's true. I tell you, we were holding our breath. I wasn't exaggerating. And I think just about everybody in mission control, nobody was smoking cigarettes anyway. It was a big deal back in those days. And everybody just glued to their console and listening and hoping. So we pulled it off, and a great success.
Is that when that picture, were you sitting with Jim Lovell and Fred Hayes at that time? Is that when that picture was taken?
It was during the descent sometime. I don't think it was right at landing, but it was during the descent at some time. And I think I was looking back, somebody had said something, you know, you listen in one ear to the crew and in the other ear to the mission control loops, and people talking to the flight director. So you want to be keyed on that side to make sure you understand what's coming from the flight, going to be coming from the flight director. So it was a very exciting job, but it was a stressful job. Capcom was not an easy, especially during these dynamic portions of the mission.
Sure.
Next mission, I wasn't on that Apollo 12, but the next mission, right at liftoff, they got struck by lightning twice. And you can imagine the consternation in mission control that was going on. And I mean, it was the coolest thing on that thing is that Pete Conrad didn't twist the board handle left and say, we're out of here. Screw, it would have destroyed the whole mission. They just kept it cool, saying they continued to feel themselves accelerating, but they didn't have any data. It was, they'd lost all the electrical power. So anyway.
Well, and John Aaron, I love that story. John Aaron understanding what could be wrong, and then the great line, you're a steely-eyed missile man.
Yeah.
That would have been one of my favorite things if we would have been able to pull off our gala, would have been just a great reunion of people who, like Ed Smiley,
Yeah.
who I don't think very many people know about the role that he played, and just that it takes such an amazing team to make it.
It's not only teamwork, but it's preparation. The planning was very, very thorough in mission control. You know, they looked at every event through the whole flight, and then they had a thorough plan, but they prepared for the plan. And John knew the system, and when they lost the fuel cells, they lost the data, but the entry battery was theirs, so it was still fully charged. And so by flipping the switch to data switch to SES aux, it recovered. And so that's thorough knowledge of the system. You know, if you listen to the crew, what's SES? You know, but they finally, not finally, but quickly, Alan Bean, which was Lunar Module C, he was responsible for that systems, and so he knew what it was, and he flicked it to aux, and everything came back and they were on their way.
You're right, that training and preparation. And Fred Hayes told me something interesting about the training process, and particularly from his perspective for Apollo 8, just trying to quickly get to understand as back up an entire other side of the spacecraft. And he said that every day they knew somebody was going to throw some new scenario at them, some new possibility. So did you feel that way? What was training like?
Oh yeah, well, we did a lot of individual training. John and I just in the simulator, and then the three of us in the command module simulator. So we went through every conceivable scenario with these sim instructors, and they wanted to show us just about every possible failure and how to respond, and also failures that you couldn't recover from. And those were the things that we just did down at the Cape. The simulators that we did and had an Apollo that were really good were all at the Cape. So we'd fly to the Cape Monday morning or Sunday afternoon and train down there all week, and then fly home on Fridays or Saturday mornings. So we got a lot of simulator time. In fact, I was figured up with backup on Apollo 13 and Apollo 16 and backup on 17. I probably got 2,500 hours in the simulator. So you knew the procedure, you knew the systems. And of course, those guys would try to kill you also down there. And, they wanted to show you, they wanted to really challenge you. And were you going to recover from this upset, if you will? And so when you got together in mission control, and they tied the two together, the simulator and the mission control team, there was a guy called Sim Soup, a whole group of folks, and it was their job to screw up the mission and to kill you, the crew, or to make mission control make mistakes. So that was their job, but it was great training. And after every simulator session, if we failed, well, even if we did a good job, you'd sit there and debrief, and everybody would go through it. And Sim Soup would say, "Okay, you did a great job here, but you missed it here." And I didn't remember this session, but we had a session that in Apollo 11 where we had the computer alarms, and I think Steve Bales called an abort, and he shouldn't have called an abort. So Gene Kranz or Bill Tyndall, one of the guys, I think it's Gene Kranz, said, "Hey, you guys get every possible failure in this computer and get it all down, and these are aborts, these are not aborts, these are maybe aborts, whatever you want to do, but make sure we know everything about that computer if when a computer alarm comes on." And that's why we were prepared for Apollo 11. I think Steve Bale tells the story that he wasn't, we didn't have to do all that work. And Grant said, "Do it, we're going to do it." And sure enough, they needed all that work. And he and Jack Garman in the back room in the GNC, they both knew. And so Steve consulted him, and we're going that alarm. They decided they had a matrix, go here, abort here. And it was thorough planning and thorough preparation that made it all so successful, Mimi. It was not just show up the day of launch and here we go. And everybody knew the systems, and both the crew and the mission control. So it was a great team.
What do you think businesses today can learn from that? What do you think the elements are that make the individual elements, in addition to preparation and planning, what are the qualities that people need to bring to the team?
Well, I think enthusiasm is important. You love your job and desire to excel, uh, an ability to focus, let push all that extraneous stuff out and just focus on the task at hand, and be a good listener and a learner. A lot of guys that never even made it into mission control that were also the flight planners and uh, procedures, checklists guys, they had a lot of knowledge, and you could get with them and learn a lot. And so it was, that's the sense of teamwork that NASA developed. And there was I never sensed any jealousy. And there was no one that was there to try to sabotage you. We all had a focus on the mission, and people were disappointed when they didn't get a crew, but they still pitched in and did what they were supposed to do, even though, I think we had 42, maybe 44 people on flight status during Apollo, and there were 27 seats to the moon. It turned out 9 missions to the moon. And so that's 27 guys, but 3 guys went twice, Lovell and Young and Cernan. And so there were 24 of us that went. And so there basically 20 guys that didn't get to go, they still pitched in and did procedures, did training help, capcoms, and all of that stuff. And they were part of the team, as vital as the crew was. So you were thankful that you got a chance, but well, I didn't ever get a chance to go. I'm gonna just screw off. Nobody had that attitude.
That's exceptional, I think. I think that's a great lesson. And you mentioned enthusiasm. I have to say, sometimes if I am having a stressful day, or I'll just go into our own museum, and we have the Apollo Theater there where we can hear all of the conversations and the video footage between mission control and, well, all the missions. But I love watching the conversations when people are in their EVAs on the lunar surface. And you just sound, in all those recordings, so full of absolute joy. It's a delight to me just to hear your voice. So where does that come from?
Well, I'm naturally an optimistic guy, and John Young had a great sense of humor. So we trained for 2 years together just on Apollo 16, plus the backup on 13. And so we had that. Training can get really boring, and it's because it's repetitious over and over and over again. And John just had a great sense of humor, and we joked a lot. And we decided that's the way we learned to train, and that's the way we're going to do it on the moon. And I think both of us had an enthusiasm, like a little kid at Christmas attitude. Man, I'm on the moon. I'm finally here, and look at that rock, and wow, let's go over there. And it was just this enthusiasm, like a little kid at opening his presents on Christmas morning. He looks at one and goes to the other, and that was basically our attitude. And so John and I decided to have a good time, and we were going to have fun doing it. And so that was my enthusiasm, and I think that was my nature anyway, to get excited about. I mean, you can imagine, wow, I'm on the moon. It was awe and excitement and adventure and wonder, and yet one of the most incredibly moving experiences I had, because you never forget that I'm on the moon, and this gray landscape that's the most desert you can imagine. And yet it was uh, it was just so a feeling like you belonged. I mean, it was not a stranger in a strange land. It was, man, I think that had a lot to do, a lot of that had to do with the fact that we had studied our landing site so thoroughly, and we recognized these major landmarks like Stone Mountain and South Ray Crater and North Ray Crater. And as we pitched over and saw the surface for the first time, we recognized the large craters, Gator and Lone Star, and then Plum and Flag, and which was our first destination on geology. So we felt right at home. That had a lot to do with it. We didn't, you didn't sit there worrying, oh my God, I hope this suit holds together, and hope don't spring a leak. And you just never thought about those things. You were trained to take care of them if you had experienced things like that. But that was in the back of your mind. You never worried about it. You were never wringing your hands. We're 4 miles from the lunar module. What if this car breaks down? Well, you walk back. We trained for that, and so it was just a familiarity with the moon that made me feel so much at home, and the excitement of being there. And I think our personalities just showed forth the same personality we had during training.
Now, there was one time when I know John worried about your suit, and that's when, and you talked about it when you were here at our Earth Rising event, when you decided to try for the vertical, what was it, the vertical jump, and landed on.
Yeah. Well, if you listen to the first part of that, was that we had planned to do the Moon Olympics, and we were airborne in April, and in August that year, the Olympics were going to be in Munich, Germany. So, we wanted to do something cute and funny. And so we said, well, let's do the Moon Olympics. And John and I had been practicing the broad jump and the high jump. And so, but we were running behind. And so Mission Control was pushing us along. And John said, well, Houston, we were going to do the Moon Olympics. And he started jumping like this. And I said, yeah, we're going to do, I don't know what I said, but I said, yeah. And the TV camera was on me, and it showed me bouncing. And when I sprang up, I straightened up. And so my center of gravity went backwards, and I started over backwards. And I was scrambling for my balance, but I never made it. But I did have sense enough to roll right and land on my right side, which broke my fall enough that the backpack wasn't damaged. And I remember John came over and looked down at me. He said, that wasn't very smart, Charlie. And he was a little angry. And I said, I know, help me up. His balance was just fantastic. He could jump way up and come right back down. But mine, I fell over frontwards, and I'd fall. And the only time I fell over backwards that one time, but I can't tell you how many times I fell over frontwards, tripping over a rock or trying to pick up a shovel or something. So that ended the Moon Olympics. Mission Control was very upset. And so I got back up, and TV camera was still pointing right at me. And they said, okay, guys, no more of that, and get back inside. So we got back to work. And I think right after that, I left. I walked out. I had this picture of my family in my pocket. And so I wanted to leave that picture on the moon. And I'd asked Slayton if I was okay, could I do that? And he said, yeah, sure. So I pulled that picture out and dropped that picture of the little snapshot of my family on the moon, and took a picture of the picture. And then we started getting stuff back inside. But I had a medallion from the Air Force, a flag. It was the 25th anniversary of the Air Force in '72. So And I was the only Air Force officer flying that year in Apollo. And so I'd called the Chief of Staff's office and said, hey, I'd like to wish the Air Force happy birthday from the moon. Do you think that's a good idea? Of course, they jumped on it. Yeah, that's great. So I asked Slayton, and he said, okay with me. And so we just cut out a few minutes, not even a few minutes of time to do that. And so those were the last big items that I did on the moon, and then started hauling stuff back inside. And while John went out and parked the rover, and then I got inside and he came back in, and a couple hours later we ready to lift off, and off we went.
It's just amazing to me. You say things like John parked the rover, like Greg parked the van. It's on the moon. It's just incredible to me. But one of my other favorite stories you told, because I think for those of us who've never been, we forget about rotation and alignment, and we assume that you can see the Earth from the moon. But your one glimpse occurred because of your mishap, isn't that right?
Yeah. Our landing site was just east and south of the center of the moon. So that puts the Earth directly overhead in relation to the moon. And a lot of people asked me, said, what was it like looking down at the Earth from the moon? I said, well, if you look down from the moon, you see your feet. It's a big object, so you got to look up to see objects in the sky. And for us, the moon was, the Earth was right overhead. So in Apollo, you look up and you're looking at the top of your helmet. It's like being in a big fishbowl. It's covered over, and you only have a visor in the front. So we didn't visually get to see it except through a little telescope that we pointed the antenna, helped us point the antenna at the Earth. So when I fell over backwards, yeah, there's the Earth right out there in front of me. And so I got to see that beautiful jewel of blue and white.
Let's talk a little bit about the Cosmosphere. And you and Dottie have been wonderful in the times you've come here and everything you've done for us. And thank you for the contribution that you're sending. That just means so much, because you've been everywhere and seen everything. And so to know that you care about us is no little thing. So what would you tell people who are viewing this telethon or tuning in during the auction? Why should they care about the Cosmosphere in Hutchinson, Kansas?
Well, I think it's one of the museums in the United States that is one of the most authentic collections and authentic viewpoint about space. They have you're world renowned. The Cosmosphere is world renowned for making replicas of all of the spacecraft. They're involved in the restoration of the Gus Grissom's Liberty. They've recovered Saturn V engines. I think there are 5 that have been under restoration there at the museum. And you've got some of the most talented Cosmospheres, not only an exhibit that's fantastic, but then the restoration and the ability to replicate a spacecraft accurately is unknown in anybody. I think in anybody else in the world. Cosmosphere is at the top of the list. So I'd hate to see that evaporate. So we want to help, and we're able to do that personally. And hopefully we can motivate those of you who are looking at this telethon, a video, or whatever we want to call it, that you'll get involved too, because it's well worth it. And it has motivated a lot of kids and a lot of folks to look to the stars and to dream big. So help them out, everybody.
Well, I've loved visiting with you. I could go on for hours, but that wouldn't be fair to you. So I'll let you go, and please give my love to Dottie, and I hope that you both stay well and have a safe trip to Minneapolis.
Thank you very much, and all the best to you all. Give everybody up there our love, and I hope to see you soon.